Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think just the easement language and documents so that you have that on record before you issue a building permit on someone else's property.
So it's not merely designating it on a drawing, he's looking for a lease document.
Everything we're doing is on the Kulinski property. We're not traveling over anybody else's property. We have a lease agreement with the Kulinski family, or their entity.
And I think, and I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but I think you're looking to have that produced.
Right.
Do you understand the distinction?
It's not what your letter says, number one, and number two,
Well, we're
I'm
not
not sure
here
why
to-
you need it.
we're not
It's
here
a
to-
private arrangement between a private property owner and another.
Well, we're not here to quibble tonight.
We're happy to give you a redacted copy. We're not gonna disclose financial terms, but it's not part of your ordinance. And frankly, I'm not sure why that would be an issue for an engineer, when in fact the lease says, the tower lease area, it doesn't say the tower lease agreement.
So Chris, you want to respond to that?
The plans call out several easements, copies must be submitted to the village, is basically what it says for those 5 things. And if there's no easement for the lease, then, you know, I guess it'd be nice for the village to have a copy in my mind, just so that they have a comfort feeling that they're issuing a building permit on Mr. Kunze's property, and Mr. Kunze has agreed to it.
Attorney Macy, will you weigh in, please?
On the lease?
Yeah, what we're just talking about.
Well, many communities ask that they see that there is a lease from the property owner, and the redacted version is what they generally are only, most communities only ask for the redacted version. They don't believe the financial.
You got your microphone on? Why don't you turn your microphone on, please? Begin to- Is it a reasonable request?
Yes, and the property owner has, I assume the petitioner has indicated they would file a redacted version. That is a reasonable request to ask, to make sure that there actually is a lease in existence.
We are happy to provide a lease, a redacted version, but you have Mr. Kunze right here tonight. He's gonna sign the conditional use permit. You know, I don't understand this issue, and that's not what this letter says, but we're gonna move on.
Well, I guess it's real simple. Will you
It's not real
provide it?
It's more,
Just let me
it's more
finish. Let me
nonsense.
finish,
It's more
please.
nonsense to put another roadblock in front of us.
So you're not willing to provide
We are
a
gonna
copy?
provide it. I said that. Let's move along.
Argue, sir.
Listen, we are
Item
going to
1B.
provide a redacted lease, even though your ordinance does not require it, and even though this letter from Royke and Roykert and Milky does not require it. We'll give it to you anyway, as a
Right.
bonus.
Item 1B, please. The letter, item 1B.
The site plans that we showed provide where the access is. It's a 25-foot wide access area from Glendale Road to the facility. That will be reflected in a memorandum of lease that is recorded with the Waukesha County Register of Deeds. We haven't recorded that yet because we don't have approval for this site. We're not going to record an easement at this point in time when we don't have approval for a site.
All right.
But your plans clearly indicate where the access is.
We're going to take time out for a minute. I'm going to ask Attorney Macy to weigh in on this. You have a copy of the letter of the 18th of September?
I don't, probably.
All right, so it's page 42 in the packet.
It's up on the screen.
So we need to go through, and let's cut to the quick here. 1A, B, C, D, and E. My understanding this is we're basically asking for these documents to be produced. Are these reasonable requests? We need to know whether they're reasonable requests and whether the petitioner is going to agree to provide them or not. We need to get this cleaned up and do it now.
Are you asking me or Mr. Macy? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yes. Which one, Mr. Macy or me?
I think.
I want to see if we can get two attorneys on the same page tonight, okay? And I don't mean that
So
unkindly.
you're
I'm
asking
both.
Mr. Macy? And I
Yeah,
would
I'm
like to
asking.
hear his
Let's
answer.
let him speak to it, okay? Go
I
ahead.
don't find them to be on a reasonable request that they, at some point, provide these documents to make sure that they exist and that they're referenced on the plans. And all Mr. Janelli is indicating is that the detail of what is referenced on the plan should be provided. I don't think that's an unreasonable request. As to whether they have to present them as part of the public hearing or not.
No, I think my intent is that the village gets them sometime before you issue a building permit.
So is that a reasonable request, sir?
And it is, but we already have this. There's a 25-foot wide easement described by a surveyor, a licensed surveyor, and stamped on this document that's been submitted. That's all you need, but we are happy to provide, once again, a redacted copy. We're not going to be recording a separate easement agreement. We're going to record only a memorandum of lease that will reference the access and utility rights.
Well, I guess at this point in time, and somebody differs with it, this is basically a request that has been made. I think the expectation is, Attorney Macy has said these are reasonable requests. I think a reasonable expectation is that you will respond, you'll understand and respond to those requests, and basically, let me finish,
We're going to submit anything you want.
Let me finish.
Come on, man, this is ridiculous.
It is not. It is not. And when you submit those things, we'll allow our staff, Attorney Macy and Engineer Janelli, to see whether those satisfy the requirements, okay? Do you agree to
It
that?
should not have any effect on your decision tonight. We have already submitted this information, as I've said 14 times. We will submit a redacted copy of the lease, as I've said 15 times. You'll have everything that you need. I would point out that Wisconsin state statutes, section 660404, sub 2, sub C, says if the political subdivision does not believe that an application is complete, the political subdivision shall notify the applicant in writing within 10 days of receiving the application that the application is not complete. We've never received any notice of any kind to say that our application is incomplete. So for this to happen at this stage of the game,
Oh.
doesn't make any sense.
Well, it makes sense because this is a letter of September 18th. It's
That's
2
right. It's 3 months old,
plus
we've never been asked to
old,
surprise.
And you heard our attorney simply say these are reasonable
Can we
requests.
move on now?
Item 2, please.
We will get an erosion control permit. We understand that that's necessary. We don't have it today, we can't get it today.
All right, and you will
We'll certainly
submit
get that.
that to the village prior to the start of construction. We agree. Item
That's what
3.
you have Mr. Malarkey for. He's gonna make sure all this happens. All right, item number 3. If there's a requirement for a culvert, we'll design and build a culvert. We are willing to comply with all of these requirements.
And that must be shown on the site plan and grading plans. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%.
Thank
Let's
you.
move on. Number
Item
4.
4.
A low spot. First I'm hearing about it. Certainly we will address it, and certainly it can be addressed when the driveway is constructed. So you have our assurance that number 4 will be addressed as well.
Okay, number 5.
I don't see number 5, let's see. We'll build an asphalt driveway. If that's what's required by the ordinance, we have no choice. We will certainly do that.
Okay? Thank you.
As far as the driveway, Keith Nyman, we have no problem coming out of the right of way with the asphalt driveway. It's more to accommodate Mr. Kulinski's sheep and grading, et cetera. So we're gonna have a fence to keep in the sheep, et cetera. But the idea is not to run a legitimacy all the way up to the 50-by-50 lease parcel.
No, and that's not necessary. The
Okay.
ordinance, I think, talks about 3 feet as a minimum.
So we would absolutely do that, do the culvert, the erosion, whatever is necessary, erosion control, that's commonplace. And as noted, just to point out, the legal descriptions, everything are in the stamped certified survey from Craig Keach, Meridian Engineering at the back of the drawings. It's a big set of drawings, it's been there.
I may not have gotten the whole set of
Yeah,
drawings.
and that's fine, it's all there, it gives all the different utilities, the access, et cetera, so that is already in play. And then what we do typically do, and it's not just Diamond, it's, I've worked for all the carriers, they typically record at the county level what we call a memorandum of lease agreement. So you don't get into the redacted agreements that they used to require 20, 25 years ago when I started. Now it's a 3-page form that Mr. Coonsy's already signed, Diamond's already signed and notarized, says we've got an agreement in place. It lays out the gist of the agreement without any financials or anything else like that. There's confidentiality agreement within the agreement. So the memorandum of lease agreement that will be recorded once it's under construction or completed is commonplace and will be recorded at the county seat.
Okay. That should be fine.
That would be the typical, when somebody requested of me and says, hey, I want a lease agreement, you're gonna get so much redacted information. All the carriers hold tight to this kind of information. The memorandum of lease agreement are all over the place, nationwide.
Sure. And I think my concern was that you've got the ability to access the site during construction, and if that lease agreement that is redacted says that and refers to these drawings with these easements shown on them, that should be more than sufficient.
Yeah, the survey already covers all. It's a 3-pager. You start out preliminary, but the one I gave him, which is already a little dated because we've done the resubmittal with the AT&T information, but that was already completed. And I can certainly give you a copy. I'm sure Sean's got one somewhere.
Sure.
Good.
Okay, I guess one other question is maybe goes to staff as much as anything, but regarding, we're talking about the driveway, and correct me on this, and Attorney Macy might even know from other stuff. Kunze Lane is a private street, is that right? Is there any applicability to village ordinance here with the number of access points to that property or anything? Is that applicable at all? Any part of our chapter 36 with the number of accesses? Is this one property or these multiple properties, or what? Is the driveway in addition to the private street, is that perfectly permissible with our ordinance?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I don't know.
I've looked for this issue before for other circumstances. Our ordinance doesn't have a limit in terms of the number of driveways on local roads. It's a case-by-case basis as far as I know in terms of just overall number. And so this property has access to Queens Lane. It doesn't have an access point in Glendale. This is the first point on Glendale for this property.
All right, so this is considered a local road, is it?
I'm sorry, Glendale is a county road.
Is-
The village road.
Is Glendale a county road or a village road?
Yeah. When we say local road, local municipality, the local government, so it's village. I was confusing Lonsdale and Glendale. Glendale is a local village road, Lonsdale is a county road.
So just to clarify, we don't need approval from Waukesha County or the state of Wisconsin for this driveway.
That's not my issue, and I know we've got some other things to look at, but we have, trying to see if there's applicability if there's restriction to the number of access points to that property. And that, I know that's, we get ahead of ourselves, but that's another issue that we're looking even at a possible ordinance amendment, and I don't want to commingle that with another issue, but is the applicability of, and I don't remember what that is it chapter 36, what? Does that have any applicability? I guess I might look to you, John. Do you know what I'm asking here in a rather clumsy way?
Well, if you're asking me what the current regulations are for a property on a local village street as to the number of access points, if that's the question, if we have a limited access highway restriction, I'm not aware of any. Some communities do. We may have driveways have to be so many feet from an intersection. We may have a maximum number of driveways that the property can have, but I'm not familiar even with any of those restrictions. So maybe the engineer or the planner, if that's your question, if you're saying we have X parcel and how many access points can X parcel have, I don't know of a restriction that we have.
I think you probably know where I'm headed. Does that have applicability? What's the ordinance that restricts that? And does that have applicability to Glendale Road or not?
Well, let me just, if I could really quickly say, every time we look at commercial properties, for instance, the fire chief is the first person that says he wants 2 access points on a road. So already we know we can have more than 1 access point on a road. There is no limit in terms of the number. It's based, we do have restrictions based on distances between streets and so on. So that's something that we've talked about with respect to the Sunset Drive property, but in terms of having more than 1 access point from a property, that isn't in the code.
What is that particular ordinance, and does that have applicability here? I guess that's just all I want to clear through.
I think the one you're referring to is chapter 36.3.
Yes. Is that applicable or not, or what does that say? Yeah, it's 36.3.
I guess I would look at this particular property as this being the first driveway off of a public road to the property. The other access is on a different property with a private drive.
So those are separate properties, they're 2 different properties, is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I would just like to close by reading 2 provisions of the statutes. We understand that you have a job to do here. We understand that you need to protect your residents. We understand that we need to follow your ordinance. We think we have. We also need to follow the state statutes. And the section 660404 sub 2 sub D as in dog says within 90 days of its receipt of a complete application, a political subdivision shall either issue or deny a permit. And if it's denied, the denial has to be in writing and has to contain substantial evidence which supports that denial. And I would ask you to think about everything that's been submitted now over the course of 2 months from Diamond and from anybody else. There is no evidence whatsoever to deny this permit, let alone substantial evidence. So again, we're seeking your approval this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other Plan Commission members, village board members, questions, comments? Go ahead.
What's the diameter of this pole at the base?
Is that a question for me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Somebody, it's not mentioned anywhere. It doesn't say anywhere in any of these documents how
Could
the
you repeat the
diameter.
question? I didn't hear.
What's the diameter of the pole at the base?
The base is 6 feet in diameter?
6 feet.
6 feet in diameter.
Okay. My next question goes to Planner Malarkey. On page 5 of the documents that you gave us, these special conditional use requirements that are listed, are these town code or what is that?
Yes, that's the conditional use section for wireless telecommunication facilities in the town zoning ordinance.
All right, on page 5 of that document, item Roman numeral 7 says that tower diameter will not exceed 5 feet.
I'm sorry, I was just told by Mr. Lightsky that the diameter is 60 inches, which is 5 feet.
Makes a big difference.
Well, I apologize, I didn't have that information off the top of my head. There was a 6 in my brain, the number is 60 inches.
Is that on a drawing someplace that you can direct us to?
Absolutely, it's all part of the
Please.
plans that we've.
Well, I'm just asking if you can identify or somebody can identify the sheet on the drawing.
I'm looking at the sheet now.
Sean's looking for it. I don't think it's
No,
on the
it'll be on the tower drawing.
You know exactly what page?
It'll be on the tower and foundation drawings, not these.
Oh, that's not here?
No, we get them after the fact. There are 2 sets of, this is for submittal.
Come on up. Okay.
The physical tower dimensions, how the foundation is designed and everything is based on a geotechnical report. The tower itself is 60 inches. We get that as a separate set of plans when we submit to your building inspector or your building department for a building permit. You will get a set of tower and foundation drawings. Within that, it will show the tower diameter at 60 inches, and then it will show a specific foundation that we intend to build underneath the tower. So it is in your ordinance is something we will comply with, and that we cannot get a building permit unless we do.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and I guess I'm a little bit lost. We've got a packet that is this thick of how many drawings, and you're telling me that the foundation and stuff for this tower and everything isn't on the drawings we've got?
It's not done yet. You have to do a geotechnical, we have to drill in the soil. We have to take soil samples, which we did last week, to determine what type of soil is underneath this, so we can design a foundation. It is very typical. Every jurisdiction we work with is the same way, and your building inspector, whoever issues your building permit, then reviews those drawings, what we provided to him, and make sure they're in compliance. They're stamped and sealed by Sabre, just like everyone else, all the other stuff that we've submitted to you. And then it is done, and then he issues the building permit. So we are totally in compliance. There's nothing irregular here.
I understand that, but I'm simply trying to clarify. We've got a huge, I didn't bring it tonight, I mean, we've got a huge packet of information, so what you're telling me is at this point in time, those aren't complete or site-specific.
No, in about a week or so.
So are these just typical details? These aren't
Yes.
for the site itself?
That's typical detail, yes.
So they're generic details.
Yeah, there are two different types of foundations. They're all very similar. Every tower has one. It's all dependent, the size and the depth of the foundation is strictly driven by the types of subsoils.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm an architect and professional engineer. I get it. All I'm trying to understand is this great big packet of drawings we've got is not complete or it's not site-specific, and that's what I'm hearing.
Everything, it is complete. Everything but the foundation is complete. That is standard across the industry, across every jurisdiction we have ever permitted.
And it's complete for purposes of zoning. It's not complete for purposes of a building permit. We understand that. That comes later. Like any other project that's built, you don't get building plans, final building plans, until you know that the site is permitted. Whether it's a restaurant or a monopole for a cell site.
So just to clarify, I guess, and I'll direct this to Planner Malarkey and Engineer Janelli, did you understand that these were not complete at this point in time, or not site-specific? Okay. Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Okay, along those same lines, on page 8 of that same document, we talk about building enclosures. You told me that these are going to be structures or enclosures or buildings. Item 4 on there says that they will not exceed 15 feet in height, and the construction materials will consist of a brick exterior. My understanding
Where are
is
you
these are
looking
supposed to be metal.
In our ordinance, or wireless communications conditional use ordinance, there's section, is it X?
10 item 4.
Yes, 10, item 4 says the total height of the structure shall not exceed 15 feet in height, and the construction material shall consist of a brick exterior on all sides of the structures. The ground, and so my note was that the ground equipment compound is shown to be enclosed by a 6-foot high, 50-foot by 50-foot chain link fence. The proposed equipment structure enclosure materials are not indicated as brick, and so that is,
Sorry, which item are you looking at on page 4, Sean?
and no, it's on page 8.
Page
On my chapter.
50
The
foot.
short answer to this is if I misspoke, we will comply with your ordinance and build a brick structure. That's not what's typically required in most municipalities. It's not what's typically provided by the service providers. But if that's what's required, that's what we'll do. That's, again, a building permit issue.
And so I'm confused, I'm a little confused here. This isn't my code language, this is language that, Attorney Macy helped draft and has been used in the past. And so what we mean by structures or compounds or enclosures is a little ambiguous here, I think.
Well, what you address here is the 50-foot by 50-foot chain link fence.
Correct.
Is addressed on the next page under security. And I'm interpreting what this says is that the structures within that security fence are to be brick.
So instead of the metal equipment cabinet, you're saying it's supposed to be brick?
That's my interpretation of the ordinance, unless I'm incorrect.
And I will just say that if that is the correct interpretation, that's what we'll do. But I don't believe that was our understanding. But we will do whatever is required under the ordinance. And we would ask that you have your town planner, or excuse me, village planner work with us to make sure we are in full compliance as this CUP requires.
Well, I would, again, I would look for another interpretation of the ordinance or a second opinion, potentially by Attorney Macy in terms of what this specifically requires, because I'm not sure.
I'm not prepared to give an opinion tonight without doing the research on it. I knew nothing of this issue before 2 minutes ago. And Mr. Malarkey's made his opinion, and we can research it if you want us to research it. He said it'll meet the requirements.
Why don't you put your microphone on, please, and talk into it? Thank you.
Okay. Apparently the representation is they'll meet the requirements.
Tell me whatever is required, is what they said.
And I guess we need clarification on what is required. It says also in this document that the 50 by 50 compound will be enclosed with a chain link fence. That was our intention. What goes inside that fence are typically these cabinets. I'm not aware, if you're talking about the 50 by 50 structure, and if you could point out the correct provision of your ordinance, we will take a look at it. We will comply with whatever the ordinance requires. However, that's not a typical application anywhere. That the equipment inside the compound is typically never built in a structure. It's housed in a cabinet, like any utility cabinet that you see, for any utility application.
So just to refocus, we're on page 8 of Planner Malarkey's staff report. Is that where we're at? We're at the 4th item there, and our ordinance, the language from our ordinance says the total height of structure shall not exceed 15 feet in height, and the construction materials shall consist of a brick exterior on all sides of the structure. Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're looking at.
Commissioner Buchholz?
Is that, could you pull up
Correct.
the
And
ordinance?
if you read that whole section from number 9 at the top, it talks about buildings and enclosures and the equipment inside of the compound. If you read that whole section all the way down there, that's what it's referring to. Then when you go to the next page, page 9, it refers to security. And it says that the compound should be, or it says that the entire assembly should be enclosed
I think you're right.
with a fence.
You're right.
So my interpretation of the ordinance is that the structures that are inside of the compound, inside of the 50 by 50 foot chain link fence, are to be of brick. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, I would like an opportunity to look at that further, but again, we will comply with your ordinance. That's not what we're doing at the ballpark, you should know. We're building a brick exterior, and there's going to be metal cabinets in there.
Right, but you won't even be able to see them because they're enclosed in
I
a
understand.
block exterior.
That's,
I wasn't part of the planning commission.
You were not part of that.
so, if you wouldn't mind, I would like to have an opportunity to work with Attorney Macy and your planner, Mr. Malarkey. However, again, we would ask for approval tonight, and we will comply with all of the terms of your ordinance.
Mr. Malarkey, do you have a condition that says they have to comply with all of our ordinances?
I'm sure there is, let's look at it.
I was also looking for one that said comply with all conditions of the engineer when you're looking.
Right, so that one, I have a note to add that one, to satisfy the Engineer Pinelli's comments prior to issuance of building permits. I certainly can, so all these conditions that are listed in at the end of the staff report under the recommendation are based on the requirements of the conditional use regulation. I'm looking for
To be honest with you, our preference, I think, would be to build a brick or a block enclosure, 50 by 50, and do the metal cabinets inside. Is that a fair statement? That's what we're doing at the ballpark. That would make more sense than requiring these tiny little buildings to be constructed, when in fact all that's needed is cabinets.
May, are you on page 15 of your report, Sean? I'm looking at page 15, item D at the top. It says the total height of the tower compound
Yes.
shall not exceed 15 feet in height, and the construction material shall consist of, and that's left blank. Is that where we ultimately need to
That's
go?
where we need to clarify the structures versus the compound and what materials.
Are you following that, Commissioner Buchholz? Or on page, under his suggested conditions, if approval were granted on page 15, look at item D on the top of page 15, and that's left blank.
Yeah, I see that. It appears you're asking for a waiver not to build brick structures, but you're gonna enclose the thing with a brick wall. That's what they're asking.
And I would say, until I can take a look at the ordinance, I wouldn't classify that as a waiver. We will build a brick structure around the equipment that's inside. We'll do the exact same thing here as we're doing at the ballpark.
Sean, was it your intention by leaving that blank that that's something that at some point in time, and again, we're just in the public hearing at this point in time, that was it your intention that that's something that the Plan Commission and Village Board
Right.
should address?
Yeah, as I mentioned when I introduced the topic, that there was a couple things that were unresolved. One was whether or not landscaping is required, and second is the perimeter of the fencing, whether it's block or brick or fencing, and so there was some confusion on my part in terms of structures versus overall compound, but the ordinance does appear to say structures are brick and then security fencing is something different.
Anybody else want in on this one?
I guess my question is, if they propose to construct the entire thing in brick, that would encompass the structures themselves, would that satisfy the requirement or not?
I think that's a fair question, and I'm not sure we resolved that at the public hearing here, but that would certainly, I think, would be a discussion. I mean, people could certainly weigh in or look for clarification at this point in time. Is that something that be addressed and resolved outside of the public hearing here, Attorney Mays, or what would you advise us to do?
Well, it's difficult to, I don't know how it'd be resolved if it's a requirement, they have to meet it. And the determination as to whether it's a requirement is made generally initially by the planner, and if he needs guidance of the Plan Commission, he brings it to the Plan Commission. So, it's not necessary, if your question is, do we have to resolve it, meaning getting evidence into the record tonight regarding that issue, my answer would be no. That is a legal determination. That's, as council has suggested, one way to do it is to work with staff and determine what the legal requirement is, and then they will satisfy.
So-
He's just saying he wants the opportunity to make the argument as to how he's going to satisfy the legal requirement. Sean makes the determination, and if he has question in his mind, our past practice is he brings it back. Separate and aside, just as an interpretation question of the code, not the specifics of this project. Right, Sean, you would agree with that?
Right, but if we don't solve it tonight, then we gotta replace D, take it out and replace it back with the exact language that's in the ordinance, and then we'll figure it out later, and I'll meet whatever's required by the code.
Yeah, again, I would ask that we stipulate and agree here tonight that we build a block or brick enclosure, 50 by 50, just as we're doing at the site you've already approved at the ballpark, that should comply with the requirement here. So, to say that the equipment cabinets inside must also be brick, I mean, that's like saying you have to build a brick refrigerator inside your home. This is a piece of equipment inside the structure. So we don't see these equipment pads as being structures. They're cabinets. They're equipment housed within cabinets.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Other issues, other information you're looking for? Anybody else from the public wish to speak? Because we're soon gonna head towards closing the public hearing unless there's any more testimony, any more comments, any more questions. I'm getting the sense that we're prepared to close the public hearing.
If the commissioners have questions of staff, that is evidentiary type of questions, they have to ask them as part of the public hearing. If it's just working on the conditions, that's fine, you can do that. But if it's, you're gonna say immediately close the public hearing, then ask Sean or Chris or myself a lot of questions that should have been part of the evidence, and council would have an opportunity to respond to. We have to get that in the record. I just want to remind the commissioners, I'm not saying you have any more questions of staff, but if you do, this is the opportunity to ask them, please.
Everybody understand that? Thank you for that clarification. It's appropriate for me to close the public hearing unless there's any objection to it, or we need to take a formal vote on that?
If there's no objection, you can close the public hearing. Some communities always take a motion on it, and others say, the chairman says, I'm closing the public hearing if there's no objection.
All right, is there a pleasure of the plan commission of the board as to whether or not you want to vote on the public hearing closing or not? Unless I hear any strong words in that regard, or I'll ask one last time if there's anybody else from the public who would like to speak. Petitioner, the staff, plan commission, or village board members. Hearing none, then I will declare this public hearing closed at 8:10 p.m. And we'll move on to item 9, which is discussion and possible action on a conditional use permit and site plan/plan of operation for petitioner Keith Nyman, Friends Agent, close Friends Diamond Communications, and RLGC LLC for the property located at S52, W24084 Glendale Road, tax key WAKT 140494 to construct a 170-foot monopole cell tower. Item A, 9A is discussion by the Plan Commission and Village Board. Item 9B is possible action by the Plan Commission. Item 9C is possible action by the Village Board. Just for clarification to people in the audience or anybody who may be watching this from a remote location this evening, the Plan Commission here consists of 4 individuals: Commissioner Cisney, Trustee Stigler, Commissioner Buchholz, and I. And the Village Board is represented by 4 individuals tonight. That would be Trustee Kulinski, Trustee German, Trustee Stigler, and I, and Trustee Doerr recused himself before we began all of this. So those are the identification of the people are on Plan Commission Village Board. Discussion.
Well, I'm gonna start. I guess my objection and always before this was about the distance and the need for another cell tower. I guess that was one of the issues that was brought up, or as part of the questions that need to be addressed on this. And before tonight, I still had reservations about it, but I think they finally explained to me how the cell towers work. So I'm kind of out of wind on that deal. I guess I've kind of done a 180 on it, so I guess I can live with the fact that the other site isn't what they want, so or what they need. So I really don't know that I have anything else. I guess I'm a little more consistent about the building part of it, the brick. I think we need to be consistent with the other cell tower that we just did as far as that goes. I think the brick wall around it would be sufficient. It's their equipment that's inside, and that's what's going to be subjected to weather and whatever. So if they're okay with that, I'm more about the security end of it. Keeping people from being able, or kids or whoever, being able to climb the wall and getting inside to that equipment. I know there's issues with danger and voltage and things like that, I'm sure, in there, but just for security purposes, I think we need to have a wall around it, the brick wall, and a fence.
my concern with that would be that once, if someone was able to breach that brick wall, once they're inside, they're completely concealed. So, with the fence around it, if somebody's monkeying around with, breaches the fence area, and they can, they're monkeying around with any of the equipment or, you know, smoking pot or whatever they're doing in there, they're visible from the outside.
That's a good point, Tom. I guess I didn't see that side of it, but yeah, that makes sense.
The reason I'm pretty adamant about being brick is because we have enough unsightly buildings and metal structures going up all over the place that I think it's deteriorating the quality of that strip of land along 164 to develop into anything meaningful for us. I don't think they need 4 separate buildings. They could put up 2 buildings that are made out of brick, divided in the middle, and put 2 doors on it and have 2 carriers in each building. Or for that matter, they could even get 3 carriers in a building if they still wanted 5 carriers. I think it's something that's very doable. I think it's aesthetically much better looking. And then you put a chain link fence around it, and like the trustee said, it's visible to folks from the outside to see who's going in there or who is in there.
I guess that's what I originally said, was a building inside and a fence around that to keep from getting into the brick part in the first place, so. But that makes sense too. And that would satisfy the ordinance if I'm hearing the ordinance correct at this point, the way you sounded down, is that right? Yeah.
I feel all these letters are biased. Everything's from Sabre, everything's from Verizon. What's to say in another 2 months they're gonna say that this tower isn't any good, they need another one another 3/4 of a mile away.
Well, with technology changing the way that it is every 6 weeks, we can probably assume that there are going to be some times in the very near future where this has to, where we'll be right back here again. I don't know that there's any way for us to really suggest that that's not going to happen. But yet, in the long run, if we want our residents to feel that all of their computers, whatever, is going to be used, you can make a telephone call without going out on your front porch. I mean, I feel that this would appear with a brick surround and a fence around that. It seems to me that at least what we are doing is making this as safe as we can, or allowing for it to be made as safe as we can. I would agree with you that there are going to be changes in the future. But for right now, based on what we have heard, I don't know that we can do anything different. And if we were not to approve this, based on all of the conditions that have been provided by Planner Malarkey, and then to be satisfied by the organization that is going to be building this and Verizon, it would appear to me that we are either we're at an impasse or we have made a decision that we're not going to do this. Please help me, because I am a relatively new person here and I've never had to do this. I don't live near a tower, but I'm looking for direction from all of you too. Just with technology changing as quickly as it has, we have to assume that we are going to have changes, perhaps in 5 years, perhaps in 3 years.
I don't want to cut this off, but I guess a suggestion for moving forward. Planner Malarkey put together some suggested conditions conditions of approval, if approval were to be the ultimate action taken by the Plan Commission, the Town Board. I'm wondering we'll start on, I think, page 12 of your report, Sean. I'm wondering, and I know there are many, I'm wondering if you could just take them through their one at a time and just see how quickly you can rip through them. There's a couple of those that I think we'll have to have people weigh in on, but I guess I would suggest let's just run through them as fast as we possibly can. And I guess work with the assumption that the petitioner would agree to those, but I'm just to move the discussion ahead and focus it. Can we just do that, see how quickly you can kind of paraphrase or speed read through those? I mean, this could be a test to see how fast you can go.
There are 8 pages.
I understand that, but I think it's, I mean, the ones that should be pretty simple and straightforward, I think we can dust off quickly, so let's go.
Okay. So, first of all, as I mentioned before, this is a conditional use permit. There's already existing permit on the property. And so this would be a modification of the existing permit. We issue a new permit to both Diamond Communications, one of the petitioners, and then Family Pet Boarding, the other petitioner, and then the property owners involved, RLCG, and then the initial service providers, that's Verizon Wireless and AT&T. So that sets the stage, that's who the permit is being issued to, the site plan of operation approval is for. So what I've broken the conditions down is the telecommunication tower facility section, which is the first few pages. And then at the end is the commercial kennel operation, and then the last set of conditions are for both in its entirety. So first one is that it's for what's presented, the 170-foot monopole tower with a 5-foot lightning rod, 50 by 50 fence compound, for use for up to 4 providers, and antenna arrays. The next condition is...
Can I just interrupt you one real quick, and I told you you're gonna go fast. Can we just, for the minute, I know the word fenced is in number 1 there, fenced comment. Can we just set that aside for the moment?
Yep.
Go.
Okay. The conditional use site plan approval is limited to the tower facility owner, which is Diamond Communications, the service providers, and the property owner for the telecommunications tower facility and the property in accordance with the plans, documents, and specs originally presented on October 29th, November 12th, and then we need to add today's date, December 10th as well. So the tower will be located so that there's sufficient clear radius. They've shown that the 95-foot far radius is on the site plans. So it lands on the property itself. Setback from every lot line of any parcel for which single-family residential use is permitted by distance equal or exceeds the height of the tower. The only property within the height of the tower is to the north. The property line to the west exceeds the height of the tower, so it complies with that. But they're required to meet all state and federal codes. Number 5, number 6, adverse impact shall not have a substantial or indeed adverse detrimental impact on following, interfere with surrounding development, adequate public facilities, traffic congestion, destruction of significant features, hazard protection, and compliance with all state of Wisconsin and the administrative code, statutes in the administrative code. Aesthetic requirements, number 7, in areas where facilities are currently non-existent underground will be required, which they will be doing. No new above-ground structures, including co-location on existing structures, shall be placed within 500 feet of historic structures. That's not the case here. Any party objecting to the requirements shall have an opportunity to demonstrate that it constitutes an effective prohibition in violation of state or federal law, etc. Number 8 on page 14, interference with air traffic is prohibited. Number 9, interference with radio or television reception is prohibited. As we spent some time on this the last time around with the other site, basically in the event that it's determined by the FCC that the tower, alternative tower structure or the antenna is the source of interference, the tower facility owner shall have 10 days to correct all problems. So it's based on the FCC determination. Access, direct vehicular access to a public street, which it does. Blocking of ingress-egress routes is prohibited. Visibility and safety shall not block visibility for vehicles or pedestrians. Tower design shall not, the monopole tower shall not exceed a width of 5 feet in diameter, measured at its base, that's a requirement. Number 14, structurally self-supporting. Number 15, co-location. They have to accommodate at least 2 additional wireless communication service providers for a total of 4 at market rate, which they're proposing to do. 16, Buildings, compounds, enclosures, equipment, and associated devices shall be placed in close proximity to the base of the tower located on the site, kept locked at all times, shall have labels with name, phone number, emergency contacts. Aggregate floor area of all buildings and enclosures shall not exceed 500 square feet. The total compound shall not exceed 2,500 square feet, that's the 50 by 50 fenced area. The D was the one that's unresolved. 1,200 compound shall not exceed 15 feet in height. Construction material shall consist of, and again, just to clarify, I could simply replace that with the requirement from our ordinance that says all enclosures must, or all structures must be brick. And so that would resolve it. We could work it out with the petitioner. I may ask for input from the attorney at that point, but that's something we can discuss through here. Backup electrical power generators, if provided, they are going to be provided, shall only be operated during electrical power outages and for testing and maintenance purposes. We'll take testing only on weekdays between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. RF hazard sign has to be placed on the compound. Anti-climbing measures required. Basically, the ladder runs in the tower have to be at least 20 feet off the ground. Advertising and signage, no advertising or signage as part of this. That was number 18. Number 19, cable installation. All cable tuned from the antenna and/or antenna structure shall be installed on the ground. Lighting shall not be artificially illuminated unless required by the FAA. Color and finish. The tower and all antenna shall be non-reflective galvanized material. That condition's in there based on the discussion that took place last time around for the previous tower at the Infinity Field site. Number 22 on page 16, no outdoor storage is permitted. Number 23, hazardous materials, there shall be no use of, generation of, storage of, or disposal of any hazardous materials on, under, above, or within the land in violation of any law or regulation. Maintenance has to be kept in a maintained condition. There's remedies in here for the village as well. 25 is electrical wiring installed by a licensed electrical contractor approved by the village electrical inspector. 26, removal. If in the event that the tower is not used to host at least one facility, at least one service provider for a period of 12 months, 12 consecutive months, or continue other than in strict conformance with the conditions of the approval. So these conditions, the village may terminate the conditional use permit following public hearing. Any equipment, buildings, or affiliated equipment that are part of the facility have to be removed within 90 days. The village has the right to remove at the facility owner's expense. Number 27, financial guarantee, an agreement for abandoned facilities. There's a $20,000 cash bond, which is the limit allowed by the state statutes. 28, certification of insurance is required, up to $2 million per person, $2 million for each accident, or $6 million property damage. They must furnish that certificate of insurance to the village annually. 29, indemnification. Property owner and/or the tower facility owner as applicable, each agree to indemnify, defend, and hold harmless the village of Waukesha and elected officials, officers, employees, agents, etc., which arise from negligence or willful misconduct of the property owner or tower facility and their employees and agents. Debris. Any debris arising from the tower facility's owner's use, whether arising from construction or at any time thereafter, must be promptly removed. Anything more than 5 days would be a violation of this ordinance. No assignment. The respective rights and obligations of this conditional use permit can't be assigned to any other person or entity without the express written consent of the village of Waukesha, except that the tower facility owner, Diamond Communications, will be permitted to assign its rights and obligations to the following persons or entities without the consent. That is, any entity which is controlled by or is under common ownership or common control with the tower facility owner, or any partner or to any partnership with which the tower facility owner is a general partner. If they do transfer, they have to let us know within 30 days. Building inspection has to be inspected by building inspection. Number 33, fire inspection, complete fire inspection. 34, the conditional use permit needs to be recorded with the county register of deeds in a form approved by the village attorney. 35, reimbursement of all village costs associated with review. That brings us to top of page 18. The second part of the conditions is the commercial kennel. Again, these are the conditions that are carried over from the previous conditional use permit that was issued to the commercial kennel. And that is that it's limited to family pet boarding, and the property owner allows the continued operation of commercial kennel, single-family residence, detached garage, several ag buildings and pastures for farm animals on the property. The commercial kennel conditional use approval does not limit the lawful use of the remainder of the property regulated by zoning. The conditional use and site plan shall reflect the operation of the kennel to include boarding of dogs and cats, grooming and doggy daycare, reception and office, and bathrooms located on the first floor, and the dog training area, meeting room for staff located on the second floor, and fenced outdoor runs and agility course located outside of the remodeled agricultural dairy barn. And the hours of operation, or plan of operation, would be the 4 full-time employees and 2 part-time employees, operating Monday through Sunday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., minimum of 10 parking stalls for employees and customers. And finally, the last 2 pages are the other conditions, general conditions that we include for any conditional use that we issue related to complying with the requirements of the ordinance. Talks about extension and expansion. Talks about modification and the process for modification of the permits. And that covers it.
Okay, well done. Couple real quick procedural things so you move ahead. We've got a little bit of work to double back to item 113, 16D, and 21. Do that in a minute, but first a question, I guess, of the petitioner and Mr. Kulinski, the property owner. Are all of you in receipt of a copy of Planner Malarkey's report where he put forth all those conditions? Do you have that? And again, in a minute, we're going to talk just a little bit about 113, 16D, and 21, but do you have a copy of that, and do you consent to all of that?
We do have a copy, assuming that it hasn't been updated since November 6th.
Correct.
Any issues?
No, we've agreed to these terms.
Okay, Mr. Kulinski?
The only issue is this brick wall versus a fence. I don't think there's a reason for doing both.
Okay.
Do the brick wall.
And intention is we're going to address that in a minute. Mr. Kulinski, you've seen all of those conditions and so forth. Any issues or comments?
And I am not sure where it was mentioned on there.
Why don't you come forward to the microphone real quick so we can hear you,
Yes, sir.
please?
Yep. By the Kulinski. Was there something about landscaping on that? In regards to landscaping, I would rather not for that area. There's mature pine trees, and the sheep will take down anything else. A lot of the landscaping, brush or whatnot, is toxic.
Just on that note, I would add that your ordinance does permit this body to waive landscaping when it's not appropriate or necessary. You did do that at the ballpark site, and again, we would ask you to do the same thing here with the brick enclosure.
Okay, we'll take that up in a minute. I have 2 other real quick questions. One is kind of a procedural thing. I know you went through the existing conditional use for the commercial kennel. Does this end up then being, is that being integrated into the conditional use? So if this were to go forward, at the end of the day, there is one conditional use and it's basically all bundled together, or not?
That's correct, yeah. One conditional use permit for the property.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then I guess, go ahead, Commissioner Buchholz.
There should be a condition put on the enclosure that there's a Knox lock system.
Lock box?
Yep.
Okay, one other thing, and then we'll try to clean up the business with the enclosure part of it. I think one of the other conditions needs to be the all the items are outlined in Engineer Janelli's letter of September 18th as well?
Correct, I have that condition as well.
Okay. All right, so then Plan Commission and Board here, I think we need to address the business about enclosure versus fencing, all things such. What is your pleasure? I know we talked about that a couple of times, but I think we need to resolve that tonight.
My opinion is that there should be brick structures that are enclosed with a chain link fence.
Okay.
Not a brick wall, but a brick structure, so a building with a roof on it. I'm sure the repair guys would love to have a roof over there while it's raining too.
I would be willing to agree with you. Just knowing how things like this can be invaded, I would rather be on the safe side, the safest side.
I'm sorry, but this building,
Oh, hold
this
on,
structure
hold on.
cannot,
Nick,
it
just
cannot
stop,
have a
just
roof on it.
stop,
It cannot
just-
have a roof on
just
it.
stop,
In order
please.
to climb up the tower,
Please, will
it
you
has to be
stop?
open air, so please understand
Will you
that.
please stop? I will give you an opportunity to speak, but please do not disrupt the meeting any further. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, if you want to come forward now and address the issue, express your concern, please do so.
I will repeat what I just said.
I
This structure,
Just
whatever you wanna
come to
call it.
the,
No,
come
you know,
to the,
this is ridiculous. Really, it's
No,
ridiculous.
please.
You cannot have a roof, no, you asked me to talk, now allow me to talk.
and come to the
Cannot have a roof.
microphone and address the group
You
respectfully,
cannot
please.
have a roof on this enclosure. The monopole is in the center of it. People need to climb up and down the monopole. Equipment needs to get hoisted up and down the monopole. You cannot have a roof on this structure. It must be an enclosure that's open air. That's how every single one of these is built everywhere in this country and probably over the world. There cannot be a roof that would prohibit access to the the pole itself. We are completely agreeable to doing exactly what you found acceptable at the ballpark site. You will build a block or brick enclosure with no fence that's open air, and the equipment inside will be in cabinets. If there's a concern about breaching this structure, we are happy to put barbed wire at the top of it, but I think one of the concerns here is aesthetics. It seems to me that the whole point of putting a brick wall or a block enclosure is to avoid having a unsightly, if you will, chain link fence with barbed wire at the top. If you want us to put barbed wire at the top of the wall, we'll do that. But there is no purpose, no possible explanation, no reason for a roof, and no reason for both a brick enclosure and a fence enclosure.
Okay, I'm gonna let Commissioner Puchol's back in. I'm not sure, do you have a different vision or what? I'll let you back in.
I sure do. He's talking about 4 individual cabinets. I'm talking about those same 4 individual brick compartments or structures or buildings, not the entire enclosure being brick. Those particular cabinets should be brick with the fence enclosure as it's described in his drawings. It's that simple. I think it could even be more simple than that and have it contain either one building or 2 buildings, and you divide it like a strip mall, and each carrier has their own compartment.
Okay? Please?
Okay, just like, say, we can do what the commissioner's asking, but now you're gonna end up with 2 complete buildings, maybe 3 on this site. Part of the problem is your ordinance is based on an antiquated cell site configuration. Back in the late mid-90s into the 2000s, we had buildings. You see them all over the place. They had the aggregate sides, the roofs, and that kind of stuff. And all the equipment was inside. That's changed. Carriers have now gone to cabinetry. Part of the deal, the reason they go over cabinetry is because it's very easy to access the equipment. It's much less expensive than building a whole building. So we're kind of.
Mr. President, I have to remind you, as I reminded you numerous times, the public hearing's closed. Why we're doing this, I don't know. Why the petitioner and the people are asking questions in contrary to what I told you the law was, I have to eventually tell you that what you're doing is contrary to the law.
Okay.
I mean, we keep inviting them up here, and I don't understand why. It's not their fault. We're inviting them up there. And I told you you couldn't do that.
I won't say it.
Just link it to.
Okay. So as I understand it then, is this is the prerogative of the plan commission and the village board to decide what to do?
Yes, sir. Based on the evidence that they had presented.
Okay, so what's your pleasure? I think Commissioner Olson, Commissioner Sisney have spoken.
I guess if I'm on the fence on this thing, it's the fact that we have an ordinance, and I don't know, the easiest way out is to follow the ordinance. Correct?
Yes.
Well, that's my opinion.
Okay. Anybody else? So to clarify that, and maybe we can go to planner malarkey, then we're back to the ordinance and get me to the correct page on that. That says that,
So it's page, page 8. Page 8, number 4, below 10, is the total height of all structures shall not exceed 15 feet in height, and the construction materials shall consist of a brick exterior on all sides of the structures.
okay,
And my question originally was, would it satisfy the requirements if the total compound had a brick enclosure around the whole thing? That was one way to look at it. And Chief Buchholz had a different opinion, and he said that he thought it was better for each individual structure to be in a building, one or more buildings, inside, have there were brick with the fence surrounding it. So I was looking for direction as to whether or not the entire thing could be enclosed in brick, and if that would satisfy the requirements.
do we have a definition of the word structure in our ordinance?
Yes, I can tell you.
What is it? And maybe that will help clarify this.
It's any man-made object with form, shape, and utility that's constructed or otherwise erected on the ground or attached to something on the ground, or permanently or temporarily placed either upon the ground or upon another structure. It includes, but it's not limited to, principal and accessory buildings, signs, swimming pools, hot tubs, patios, decks, sidewalks, walkways, retaining walls, monuments, entrance gates, radio towers. Doesn't include landscaping, earthwork, etc.
All right, so then my question would be, and I guess I would ask it of you and equally of Attorney Macy, are these equipment cabinets then structures by the definition of our code? Attorney Macy?
I believe so, yes.
So your answer is yes?
Yes, sir.
Planner Malarkey?
Yes, I think there's structures, certainly.
Then I think that answers that question.
Right, but if they put it outside the compound, the 50 by 50 compound, that is also a brick wall, that's also a structure. Would that be the full total structure enclosure? Would you consider that the full enclosure?
I guess as a matter of interpretation, I think by our definition, I think these equipment enclosures are structures.
I agree.
And I guess, then the question, I mean, I guess I'm coming down on the side of where Commissioner Buchholz is at this point in time, is those need to be constructed of brick And if you want to go by the letter of that, that to me isn't even decorative masonry, that's brick. And whether that then should have a fence around is another issue, but the structures themselves would be brick.
Right, so if that's the case, I think the fence is not an issue. We know it's got to have a perimeter fence
Yeah.
around it. So then the question is the generators. The generators are on pedestals attached to the ground. Those aren't typically enclosed in brick.
Understood? I mean, there are, I guess what's the pleasure of that? Those could be screened or whatever, so.
I don't believe generators have to be enclosed. I mean, that's kind of an air thing too, but you know, too close in.
But they are structures, according to the definition of our ordinance.
The generator themselves are
Because
structures.
they're bolted to the ground.
Yeah, I understand, but you're not gonna get a brick generator.
No, you're not. But you asked what the definition of structures were, so that also
I
qualifies.
understand. Okay, we need to resolve this and move on.
So the simplest thing would be to just take our code verbatim and say those equipment cabinets need to be brick, and the surrounding perimeter fence can be a chain link fence.
Does everybody agree with that?
That's what
Okay, all right, so we've got resolve on that. What other outstanding issues are there? The
The
landscaping,
landscaping, correct.
is that the only other outstanding issue?
In my opinion, the petitioner said that they were, wary of putting landscaping around here because the sheep would eat it, potentially. There was also testimony provided that basically alluded to the fact that it's fairly well screened from the road already with vegetation. And so I leave it up to you to determine, as mentioned, there is a provision here that the plan commission can change the requirements of landscaping. And so
So we move on, I'm willing to waive any requirement for landscaping. Anybody disagree with that?
I would agree with that. I have one on our place to the cattle, only had on the eight bushes they put up anyway, so I mean, in the yard, some of the bushes they put up are toxic to livestock, so I think we should waive it.
Anybody think differently? Okay with waiving landscaping? Okay. What's out there that we have not covered?
those are the only questions that I had. As I mentioned before, the condition is galvanized metal for the color and finish, similar to the last tower that was approved. Is that okay? Does the plan commission agree?
I have no problem.
I agree.
All right, then that's all the questions that I had.
Okay. The only other thing, and maybe you think this is sufficiently covered, a compliance with things, I'm still a little bit concerned about the fact that we have drawings that are not site-specific. Do we need any additional verbiage in there or not to submit drawings that are site-specific with regard to the foundation and so forth? I think that should be an expectation. Anybody object to that?
Prior to building permit issuance?
Are we okay with that?
Isn't that subject to the building permit?
It is, but just to be clear, we can add it in here.
Okay, and I'm fine with it then.
Okay, anything else? Plan Commission prepared to act on the request. Is there a motion?
I will make a motion to approve this request by the petitioner based upon all of the conditions provided by our village planner, Mr. Malarkey. Have I said that correctly?
Yeah, and I think that embodies the conditions, recommendations of Engineer Janelli are embodied in that, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, is there a second to the motion? I will second the motion. Discussion? If there's no further discussion on that, we will vote as a plan commission. All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Do I correctly have that as 4 in favor and none opposed? Okay, then we'll go to possible action by the village board. Is there a motion?
I'll move to accept the recommendation of the plan commission.
Which was for approval with all of the conditions that were put forth by Planner Malarkey and Engineer Janelli, correct?
Correct.
All right, is there a second to that motion? I'll second the motion. Discussion. Everybody understand the motion? You prepared to vote? All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
So I have it as 2 aye and 2 opposed. I'm going to suggest at this point in time, we do this as a roll call vote. Brandon, if you would do the roll call vote on the motion on the floor, please.
Fischer.
Aye.
German. Nay. Kulinski. Nay. Stigler.
Aye.
Okay, the vote is 2-2. The motion does not pass.